To Meet the Press, College Roundtable edition, where we give students from across the country the chance to ask the questions they want answers to from people they want to hear from. This week, who's looking out for students? In the middle of summer break, the U.S. hit its all-time record for infections, with massive surges in states like Florida and Texas. Meanwhile, colleges continue to slowly and unevenly announce their return to school plans. With just a month before most students return for fall semester, millions of Americans are expected to fall off a, quote, income cliff when the enhanced unemployment benefits end. And so far, Congress has not committed to providing any additional relief. With us today is two lawmakers willing to give some answers to these student-driven questions. Congressman Kelly Armstrong, Republican of North Dakota, and Congresswoman Katie Porter, Democrat of California. And welcome to you both. And asking the questions this week, Ellen Burstein. She's a rising junior at Harvard College, and she covers college finances for the Crimson. Ellen, tell us a quick bit about yourself.
As a reporter for the Crimson, I've covered the impact of the pandemic on Harvard's endowment and revenue. My parents are frontline healthcare workers, and so I've also seen the impact of COVID-19 on the medical community and the patients that they care for. Thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Excellent to have you. Tyreye Morris, Morehouse College class of 2022. In addition to his journalism work, he's on the Morehouse Moot Court team. Tyreye, what makes that team unique?
In addition to being a journalist, I am on Morehouse Moot Court team, which is the only HBCU undergraduate moot court team in the nation. We develop arguments for a simulated Supreme Court, and we use actual cases decided on by the Supreme Court of the United States to support our reasoning. Only 5% of attorneys in the United States are black. So having moot court at an HBCU is an important step to bringing more black attorneys into the legal field.
Especially in the undergrad area, absolutely. And finally, Moss Brennan. He's a rising senior at Appalachian State, and he's coming to us from Boone, North Carolina. Moss, tell us about how the pandemic has impacted your community.
Hey, Chuck. So during my time as editor-in-chief of the Appalachian State newspaper, I covered how the community, which has a 21% poverty rate, was affected by COVID-19. Many of the businesses in the area depend on App State students and tourism to survive and struggled once the shutdown began. I also implemented Spanish translations of our articles pertaining to COVID-19 to help inform more community members surrounding App State. My goal right now is to help keep this community informed.
Excellent, and welcome, Moss. All right, Ellen, the first question goes to you, and I believe it's for Congressman Armstrong.
Representative Armstrong, thank you so much for joining us. Epidemiologists and public health officials have said that the path to reopening involves a robust testing and tracing program. The White House plans to end federal funding for 13 coronavirus testing sites by the end of this month. With states facing tightening budgets as a result of the pandemic, is it the right move to end federal funding for testing?
Well, so I don't think so, and I think we should continue to test. A lot of it becomes on where you're at and how you deal with this. We have a state, North Dakota, that has dealt with this in a much different way, and I think we need to continue to do this, not only just because of the health crisis, but also because that we need to be able to, in order for our economy to open back up, we are going to need to be able to continue to test and continue to move forward. Regardless of how you feel about the science, about all of this and the rest of it, the point is simple. I mean, and we've seen this in North Dakota. North Dakota is one of the few states that never really shut down or never had a shelter-in-place order. But until consumers are comfortable going back and participating in the economy, we're still going to see the economy struggle.
I want to follow up on that while we're on the subject of practices for reopening. Many of your Republican colleagues have resisted calls for members to wear masks during sessions. Most college reopening plans consist of strict compliance with public health measures like social distancing and mask wearing. How can we depoliticize mask wearing in order to encourage compliance with the practice?
Yeah, so I mean, I'm probably a perfect example of that. I wear it. I don't think anybody would ever say I'm particularly a rules follower, but I think there are bigger fights to have, and quite frankly, I wish we were back in Congress more often. So if wearing those masks and doing that, and the same thing in our communities, you know, we don't have that. We don't have those strict orders in North Dakota, but if a business asks you to wear it and respect it, I wear it when I go in. and deal with it. I also think, just on a little bit of a side note, we should probably give a class on how to actually wear one properly while we do this, because I think that's one of the concerns we have here is when it turns into real science-based health, and when we do it in a way that really truly turns into somewhat more virtue signaling than actual protection.
Tyreye, you have the next question for Congresswoman Porter.
Congresswoman Porter, should schools have students on campus next semester? And what has been done to help universities determine the safest way to bring students back to campus?
This is a really important question, and our universities are struggling to come up with an answer. And I've had a roundtable with local college leaders in my community, and each one is taking a somewhat different approach. What's missing is clear guidance from the federal government, as well as financial support to universities to help them make the adjustments that they need to do. So some universities I've talked to are going to adjust housing so that every student will have a single dorm room. Other universities are going to move some classes remote, reserving in-person classes for things like laboratory science. But until we have a clear testing program for our college students, as well as funding for it, I think it's going to be very difficult for universities and students, most importantly, as well as faculty and staff, to feel comfortable on campus.
So follow up with that, how would we best determine where would those finances come from? Like, will we have to take from other parts of the budget, or would we have to create more finances for these testing?
The federal government should definitely be helping our colleges and universities close this gap. We've done that. Congress has stepped up on a bipartisan basis and offered funding to small businesses, and they've offered funding to large businesses, to the aviation industry, and we need to treat our educational system the same way, to make an investment of federal dollars in the higher education system so that it too can continue to serve students during this pandemic.
Moss, you have the next question for Congressman Armstrong.
Congressman Armstrong, with the surge in online classes across the country, will you support legislation to better broadband internet access? How can colleges help provide technology to poorer college and high school students who rely on in-person resources for their education?
Thanks for the question. I love this question because it always gives me an opportunity to brag about North Dakota. We are obviously a very rural state, and we have what I think most people would say is one of the best rural broadband infrastructure in the country for a rural area. And yes, and I don't think it's just for college. I also would say prior to COVID, this is one of those areas where I think there is real broad bipartisan and actual bicameral support in order to do this. But I think the COVID-19 crisis and pandemic has shown, not just for college, but for I have a fourth grader and a seventh grader at home, and we did the distance learning as well. And it's becoming more and more clear that easy, reliable, affordable internet access is going to be absolutely essential to everybody in the 21st century, and we should do more to make that happen.
Just to follow up on that, you said you need to do more to make it happen. Schools are starting up in August. You have about a month and a half. What can you do in this month and a half to help better broadband internet access?
Well, one, I think we have to recognize that we had a lot of companies across the country step up during this time to work through it. And then one thing that, I serve on the Select Committee on the Climate Crisis, and this might seem like a weird place to go with this, but one thing we have heard throughout that entire committee's time that we can help with, and I think we can do regardless of what type of transportation and what type of infrastructure you are putting in place, is to speed up the process without dealing with all of the other issues, to ensure that we can adequately and reliably get infrastructure in the ground as quickly as possible. And some of that will take funding as well, but I think an investment in rural broadband is a great place for the federal government to work with states and municipalities.
Ellen has the next question for Congresswoman Porter.
Congresswoman, the coronavirus crisis poses a dire challenge for many small liberal arts colleges who are shouldering a heavy financial burden. The fate of on-campus education this fall is in question. Many schools have not decided whether they can safely bring back students, and those who plan to do so will rely on testing and additional housing, posing yet another financial hurdle. How involved should Congress get in helping these schools stay afloat?
Congress has provided support for all kinds of organizations that have been hurt by coronavirus. We've provided $650 billion for small businesses, $500 billion for our largest companies, and we need to be prepared to make a similar investment of whatever's necessary to allow colleges to adjust their practices and be able to operate in a safe way. Education is an investment in our economy and an investment in our global competitiveness. And so if Congress needs to provide additional funding for universities to make these adjustments, we ought to be prepared to do so, just like we did for small and large businesses, because they too, the colleges too, are part of our larger economy. In addition to the opportunities they create for the students, colleges are also large employers, particularly in many university towns. And so it's very, very important that we recognize that universities are also real drivers of economic opportunity and economic stability in our country.
Tyreye, you have the next question for Congressman Armstrong.
Representative Armstrong, in 2020, the student loan debt hit $1.6 trillion. Would you support standalone legislation that will defer repayments or student loan forgiveness?
Well, I'd have to see the legislation first. I think student loans is a perfect conversation to have where we have to be very, very careful of unintended consequences. And what I mean by that is one of the best parts about how we deal with student loans is to ensure that all people of all economic backgrounds have an opportunity to get higher education. And when we continue to do that, one of the things that we've also found as an unintended byproduct of how we deal with student loans is the cost of tuition continues to go up and continues to rise, and it far outpaces the actual results of either inflation or the quality of the education we're getting. So yes, I think the student loan debt crisis is absolutely something we need to talk about. We just have to make sure that when we deal with any of those issues, we don't also incentivize colleges to increase tuition at a rate that I think is unsustainable.
And Moss, you have the last question here for Congresswoman Porter.
Congressman Porter, in the last stimulus package, many college students were left out of stimulus checks and other support. If there is another stimulus package, what will you do to help college students?
Yes, so I think we should include college students in receiving these helping hand payments. They really do make a difference. A lot of our college students have faced increased expenses. They've had to travel back home. And so it's important to understand that the point of these payments is that we as the federal government can't predict exactly all of the different kinds of people and ways that families and Americans are being hurt by coronavirus. So I do support making sure that college students and college-age dependents, adult dependents, are included in any further economic impact payments that we make.
Well, we're going to leave it there. I want to thank our two members of Congress, Katie Porter, Democrat of California, and Kelly Armstrong, Republican of North Dakota. I love that we had geographic balance, ideological balance. As you can see, these are questions you don't get from us. You're getting questions on how these are impacting these college student journalists' lives. So I want to thank the two members for doing this. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Chuck, and I'd love to go see that moot court competition.
I
would too.
Absolutely, me too.
Absolutely.
Keep it up.
All right. Thank you to both of you. I want to turn now, we'll have a little roundtable conversation, turn to our student journalists now. Okay. I will, Tyreye, I'll kick things off with you. What's your biggest takeaway? What'd you learn?
One thing that I learned is that there has been a lot of legislation to support college students, even though we might not see it. The representatives both made it very clear that there have been conversations and bills presented to help out college students, and I feel like that's a great thing, especially during this time where we're going through so much financial turmoil trying to worry about next semester.
Did anything? Let me put it this way: were you disappointed in any of the answers?
I honestly, the only thing I would say that I was disappointed in is about how we would find funding for these other programs, because it's obviously clear that there hasn't really been legislation brought to say where we're going to get this funding from, and I feel like that's a big problem because with school starting back in a couple of months, these students are going to be on campus. I'm going to be one of those students as well, so I feel like that's something that Congress needs to work on ASAP so we can have a plan in place so all students across the United States can be safe.
Yeah, I heard a little bit of that philosophical divide, though. You could tell one wants to, use more government resources. The other was sort of, okay, let's make sure they've used all their own resources before the government comes in. Moss, what's your takeaway, and anything you were disappointed in?
I was kind of disappointed in the answer about broadband internet access. I'm in Watauga County, which is western North Carolina, and our internet here isn't the best. It's kind of slow. It's a rural community. So I really think Congress needs to start pushing legislation for broadband internet access, especially if colleges move more online classes, because this doesn't just affect college students, but also elementary school students, high school students. So better broadband internet access is a need in this country.
I'm with you. When I heard that, I'm like, I've heard about expanding broadband to rural America since before all of you were born. They've been talking about this since we started the internet in the mid-90s. Rural broadband access has been a topic of conversation since the late 90s, and here we are in 2020, and we're still talking about it. Ellen, final takeaway, same two questions to you. What'd you learn, and anything you were disappointed in?
I thought both representatives advocated for resources being provided to college students and to universities themselves to continue to function, which I thought was encouraging. I'm hopeful that both would be able to offer a little more details in what Congress plans to do and how they're going to determine who gets what resources. So I'll look forward to hearing that.
I think that's a fair statement. When you were asking about which colleges get resources, some of them attempted to get those PPP loans, and then I think, if I'm not mistaken, they were sort of, a couple of them said, wait, your endowments are too big. Why don't you tap your endowment before you start borrowing money for the government? So you're going to have a little bit of that tension there that I don't know if we saw yet there, but there definitely would be tension with the lawmakers themselves over that. Tyreye, Moss, Ellen, an outstanding set of questions, and what I like is you get the members of Congress a bit out of their comfort zone. They're not used to taking questions about from college constituents, and so it's important for them to hear those concerns from you guys. So much appreciated. We're going to leave it there. A big thank you to you three. A big thank you to our members of Congress who joined us. And that's going to do it for this season of Meet the Press, our College Roundtable edition. Thanks to all of our students, all of our guests, and to you, and we look forward to another season of this very soon. Thanks for watching. Hello from Washington, I'm Chuck Todd, and thanks for checking out the Meet the Press channel on YouTube. Click on the button down here to subscribe, and click over here to watch the latest interviews, highlights, and other digital exclusives.